So we can start. It's exactly 11. I would like to request Swami to, initiate the meeting.
Fine. Om Vidyanamantasthimiramihiraddvipanagari Jadanam Chaitanyastapakamakandasruti Daridranam Chintamanigunanika Janmajalatho Magnanam Damshram Raripuvahasya Bhavati. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Welcome to Dr. Nandini and all the others. This is again an attempt to sensitize about the most critical problem of the present situation, the ethical issues of corona. We already conducted 1 or 2 webinars regarding management of corona. That was also very useful. Persons who are actually treating corona and the related problems they had. We had a very friendly and a very long 3 hours discussion the other day. This is dealing with another topic about the ethical issues that is related to corona. So I hope we are all very eager to listen to Dr. Nandini, and I hope that will enlighten us, enlighten all the doctors and the PG scholars who are willing to participate in this. I welcome you for this program on behalf of Amrita School of Ayurveda. Om Amriteshwari.
Thank you, Swami. And it's a great pleasure now to invite Dr. Nandini K. Kumar. I would like to thank her for accepting our invitation. Dr. Nandini K. Kumar was the former Deputy Director General of ICMR, a senior scientist, and she graduated and post-graduated in clinical pathology from Trivandrum Medical College. She was involved in the medical research there at the Trivandrum Medical College in the liver clinic. It's very interestingly, Madam has contributed a lot to traditional medicine research and bioethics. She was very closely involved in the formulation of the National Ethical Guidelines, Stem Cell Research Guidelines, and other drafts, which includes and covers Ayurveda, Siddha, and Unani. And she is now the member of the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in India and also the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in Asia Pacific. So she's the best person to enlighten us about ethical issues related to COVID-19. There's much more to talk about her background, but to save time, I'm not going into more details. So with this introduction, I would like to now heartily welcome Dr. Nandini K. Kumar and request her to deliver the lecture. At the end of the lecture, we will also have an interactive session. So welcome and thank you, Madam.
Thank you all. At the outset, I must actually thank Dr. Ram Manohar for inviting me to give this talk, which is actually a current topic of great interest. And it's nice to speak to the other streams of medical systems because they need to be exposed to what we talk about medical ethics and research, etc., because it's common to all. Whatever stream you come from, it's common to all. So starting with my talk, so the outline of my talk will generally talk about disasters and emergencies and the regulations which are related to this, ethical issues in practice of Ayurveda, ethical issues in research, and directives for ethics committees. So ethical issues in research also would be common, and some specifics for Ayurveda. And directives for ethics committees is actually universal for Indian researchers, whichever stream they are coming from. So when we talk of disasters and emergencies, there are actually natural disasters. They may be periodic in nature, like cyclones, earthquakes, etc., or they could be like forest fires, volcano eruption. Although these are not there in our country, then man-made disasters are the one which are actually created because of terrorist activity, and also environment also plays a lot of change. I mean, a lot of influence on the health of the population. We see it's not the same. Centuries ago, you had more pure air than what we have now, and many other pollutants. We have lots of plastics, etc. So the environment is actually at great risk from what it used to be ages ago. And then we have this major thing like outbreaks, infection outbreaks. We had like flu and flu-like infections, COVID-19 to enter the scene as the latest entrant. And you have the Ebola, Zika, and Nipah virus. Of course, Ebola is more important because it's set in tone what can be done in such situations. Because of that, the preparedness was much more. Although COVID-19 presented a different, it became pandemic, whereas Ebola was not a pandemic. It was mostly concentrated in certain part of Africa. From there, it of course people who went there to help people, especially people from the Medicine Sans Frontiers, that is Doctors Without Borders. They went there to help, and also they were coming from various countries. So some of them got infected and they went to, but it got contained actually. But that actually set in tone. Uh, and WHO bringing out the concept called MURI, that is use of unregistered medicines, because everybody was in panic. Nobody knew what to start with, and there were drugs in the offing, antivirals in the offing, but they were at different stages of development, like only preclinical studies, that is in animal. The studies were over, and now they were ready for human testing. Then some were in phase one of human testing, some were in two, but then they were all allowed to be used because people wanted to actually stop the spread somehow or the other. So, Nipah, of course, we all know that when Kerala had Nipah, it was actually a ground for the state to prepare itself from any future such threats, and it did well initially, but then later, now what we are facing is not totally because of lack of preparedness, but because our own population is not following what the directives are actually. So it has spread to community. So what do we do in such circumstances? So the main situation is like, there's an incoherent mental status of people when there are like terrorist activity, etc., or tsunami and all that. You have seen how people were shell shocked because of the great loss of life that it created. And there's panic and fear when it comes to infectious diseases because everybody wants to live, so they are afraid of death. What we saw in the initial stages of HIV, we are experiencing that now. So, and not only that, the situations of isolation, quarantine, and all makes them very lonely. On one hand, you have the participants who are very lonely, feel very lonely, and are mentally depressed. On the other hand, the healthcare workers, the frontliners, the warriors are actually affected by their own loneliness within the protective uh, um, equipment. They are actually not able to communicate to anyone, and some of them have had to be away from their home for mostly 3 months, not talking to their people, not talking to their children. All that has caused a lot of mental depression among them. So this is about the mental status. Then you have breakdown of protective infrastructure and human resources for care and interventions. We are hearing so many doctors dying. So beds and beds are created. All that is there, but there is a lack of the frontline healthcare workers. because some of them are actually contracting the disease and dying in the process. So we'll have to talk a little about Disaster Management Act and what are the national advisories. So we hear a lot about solidarity. What do you mean by solidarity? Actually, it is very relevant in public health. It's called principle of solidarity. It can be between governments, like in a pandemic, all countries are involved. So there could be an international link to find a common solution, and there could be a government support for bearing costs of intervention, like the central government is supporting the state government, and so on. And also the businesses exercising their corporate social responsibility is very important, because they are also part of the country and they also have to contribute, and they should be responsible. It should not be like Monday stay in their hospital should incur lakhs of rupees to shell out. Not everybody is that rich now. So what will the middle income families do? The poor will never approach the corporate. So individuals' cooperative response in day-to-day life is also important. We have seen so many clippings where people who have to be in quarantine circumstances are running about here and there, trying to hoodwink the authorities and not be in the facility. In various parts of the country, we see these scenes happening. And it also includes Kerala, although it is supposed to be a very high in education compared to other states. But where is this education going? It's actually the wisdom which is more important. I can tell you an example of a migrant laborer with whom I came into contact through some NGO wanting somebody to talk in Hindi for the health reasons, because I can talk in Hindi very well. I I was approached and I cooperated. And this fellow, actually, like all migrant laborers who went back to their village, he also went, and he was telling that he was actually in a school, quarantined in a school along with the other laborers. But he was telling some people are disappearing in the night and coming in the morning, and some are disappearing in the morning and coming back in the night. So, and he himself is telling, "Samajhta nahi hai," means they are not understanding. So that means this fellow is an uneducated chap, but he could still understand the gravity of the situation. So education is not a criteria at all. It is the understanding that a person has which counts more in this. And lack of cooperation on that count only has increased the numbers in our country. So when we come to policy and legal aspects, starting from our constitution, Article 23 says there should be social security and social insurance. And Article 29 states prevention of the extension from one state to another of infectious or contagious diseases or pests affecting men, animals, or plants should be implemented. Now, Disaster Management Act 2005, sorry, I forgot to write the year, although I mentioned it in the previous slide. Now, it has a National Disaster Management Authority, and whichever government is there, the PM is the chairperson of this authority. Similarly, you have state, district, and local management authorities, and the national and state government advisories. So, whatever, we have to be very careful about these aspects, because under this, they have the power to actually penalize. Like you would have heard in Trivandrum, two major institutions, merchant institutions, were actually sealed, and their license actually taken away because they did not follow the advisory. So one will have to take such measures in order to bring some semblance of control. And actually it started way back. Epidemic Diseases Act in 1897, which was invoked on March 11, 2020 this time. This act has been invoked from time and again during various disaster situations. The latest is on March 11 this year, and according to that, uh, one can actually take action, as I had told you earlier. State specific acts are there or ordinances are there. State can actually do that. I'm just giving example of two: the Tamil Nadu Public Health Act of 1939, and then Kerala Epidemic Diseases Ordinance 2020, which is the latest in the scene with regard to Kerala. So this is an interesting case study. They always call it as case law, which will actually explain what is the position with regard to the meaning of what the act is all about. So this was actually Orissa Homeopathic Act, which came into effect in 1958. So Dr. Chaudhary actually was a graduate on account of this, and he was a homeopath practitioner in Puri town. And during Rath Jatra, in order to stop the spread of cholera, everyone used to be inoculated, and now that was under again the requirement, the implementation of the um Diseases Act. So this homeopath, he said that he is not going to get inoculated. He has a sufficient protective mechanism in place by taking homeopathic medicine, and he didn't want to actually get inoculated. Then naturally action had to be taken. So it went to the court, and in 63, the court said that the person, Chaudhary, did not act as per regulations. And what were the regulations? They said that the regulations don't specify that you can have alternate protection mechanism of using homeopathic drug. So that provision is not there. So as it is, because they go by words, by the law, words of the law. So they said since that is not there, he has violated the regulations. So as per 188 IPC, a token punishment was given to him, and of paying ₹5. And if he did not pay that amount, he would be actually in jail. In jail, sorry, 1 week in case it's not case in jail. If he, in case he defaulted. So this is the situation. One has to understand that even now it is like that. So unless there is provision for inclusion of the traditional systems as well, this will be the same situation. So what about the status in India and Kerala? So now, because of the change in mindset and a lot of progress being made in pushing Ayush to the mainstream, the Ministry of Ayush Advisory on January 29 um, uh, prescribed certain drugs to be used for prophylaxis, and it included all systems, the Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani, etc. So later, an addendum was added saying that they could be used as immunomodulatory drugs. And let us see what the Kerala directive was. It stated that all patients, this was declared, so it said that all patients that are there in the ASU hospitals should be discharged, and only emergency patients, when they come and COVID-19 suspects, they should be immediately sent to health or medical institutions. That means they are not supposed to treat. So now you will actually apply the previous case law that I had described. So this applies here also. Later, because of the public demand, the state allowed Ayurveda outlets and clinicals to remain open during the lockdown period. And I have myself heard the health minister stating that there's a lot of science in these traditional systems. We cannot ignore that. So these facts actually have been taken from a paper by Unnikrishnan. So doctors, it's very interesting. It's a short paper, but very interesting. So the need of the hour is that the administrative and political coordination has to be there at national level, state level, between authorities and stakeholders. And when the decisions are implemented, the district administration, local self-government institutions should take action to how to abide by it. There are also constitutional codes registering PILs and closely monitoring compliance to the Disaster Management Act and protection of human rights. You would be actually reading in newspapers that the Supreme Court said this, Supreme Court said that, and all that. So these things are becoming more common now. So, what are the ethical issues in practice that you can actually encounter? So, there are two issues mainly. How do you accost people affected by COVID 19? And how do you take care of non COVID 19 illnesses? These are actually issues which all systems of medicine face. So, COVID 19 affected patients, when it comes to that, as I've already told you, psychological trauma is very much there when you are restricted, isolation, quarantine wards, and ICU. Then there's lack of humane communication. You see these doctors, first of all, they are so tired looking after all these people. Over that, they are in that PPE, personal protection equipment, which does not allow any expression to be seen. So they are seen like robots coming in and going. So there's no humane touch there. Otherwise, even the physical presence would have actually helped them. And even if they were not to even communicate verbally, their body language would have helped them. So these are things which are actually lacking in the present situation, most of the places. And I also saw a clipping where in a very well-known academic institution, there were only three people actually in charge, almost in charge of the ICU COVID ward, and three of them means they would be very tired also, and they had to not only take care of their medical care but also see to that because there were no attenders there. So they had to take care of their other needs as well. So you can imagine what sort of exhaustion they would be actually undergoing, and these were all postgraduate students. So you can imagine what's happening all around in our country right now because of lack of the force healthcare workers. Then uncertain and experimental therapies are there, which are actually a real experiment on human beings. So we used to say about it like humans being treated as guinea pigs, but that is exactly the situation that is happening now. But it is acceptable. Earlier it was not acceptable because there were other alternatives available. But now it is acceptable because there is no other go. Then there's a lot of situation, lots of hospitals, small hospitals, they don't have PPE. So it prevents proper care and self-protection. It was nice to know that the Indian Medical Association has been actually now providing these to the small hospitals. And I was told by one of the doctors there that they are losing several lakhs per month, and this is a small hospital, they cannot afford. So there's the management was even on the point of discharging the healthcare workers because they could not afford to pay them. So when IMA supplied these materials, it was a great help to them. So one has to actually work out such mechanisms how to help in such a situation. So you have to actually prioritize scarce resources and how you go about is a great management skill. Then, when death occurs, the disposal, there's no dignified death actually. Most of the time, you see this doctor there, and all of you must have read in the media how he was actually a managing director of his institution, but he died of COVID in service, providing the care to the patients. He incurred that, contracted the disease, and died. And after death, when he was being taken in the ambulance to the crematorium, people, I told you that people are so frightened of these diseases in the initial stages. Now they are more rather settled. So 3 months back, there were more of deaths, but now there are less deaths because more knowledge has come through various experiments happening all over the world and bringing in that knowledge. So the doctors now know how to manage things in a much better fashion. So what happened was, the public came and smashed the windows of the ambulance, and did not allow the body to be taken to the crematorium. And it was lying on the road. Can you imagine that? And then his colleague, doctor, he was almost crying, saying that he had to take it to the corporation crematorium, where he had to dig himself to bury his body. So his wife actually went to the court saying that he should have the dignified way of burial by taking him to their church burial ground with the proper rituals being performed. So, in our country, there's a lot of cultural tag there. One should respect that. And then you also heard about this Bombay hospital having dead bodies along with the other patients, and the bodies were just lying on the cot like that without getting disposed. So that bad was the situation because of lack of human resources to do the things as would be desirable. So when it comes to treatment, the most important aspect is informed consent. Now, this informed consent is not the same as you do for the research aspect, because that informed consent document is a huge one, running to not less than 2 pages sometimes. So the thing is, you have to have the informed consent mainly because you have to tell them, because this is all an experimental stage, although you are actually using it in practice. So the first thing is voluntariness, whether the patient wants to undergo that treatment or not. The second one is you have to actually describe that. For example, if it is say modern medicine, then you have to describe that what are the problems that can happen by taking it. And if it is the traditional system, you can always say that this is actually proved traditionally to be of some benefit, but we cannot guarantee whether you will be benefited by that. Because very often we see these statements that this does not have any side effects. One should never make that statement, because you never know how the patient will react, as you all use the Prakriti aspect. So the person may not be actually suitable for that type of treatment. But how do you know that? You don't know that. So you have to describe that. And also you have to inform them that there are other alternatives available. So the choice is left to the patient to choose. So this is about COVID-19 patients treatment, but of course that the Ayurveda or the traditional system can be applied in the initial stages when they are not in, when they have suspect symptoms which may not actually be COVID-19. So it will help there. But if they insist that they will only take this, then you have to take the informed consent. But as per law, you are supposed to send them to the health or medical facilities. What they mean is the modern science institutions. So, if at all this has to be done with more emphasis on serious cases, then it has to be done by the policy makers and the government at top. The central government has to give the directives. So for the non-COVID-19 illnesses, they are afraid of approaching clinical facilities, or the clinical facilities may not be COVID facility, but still they fear that by going to that facility they may contract the disease. Or when the hospitals have COVID facilities, they are afraid to go to that hospital at all, and therefore you have this denial of care, like reproductive and child, no antenatal care, no postnatal care, no delivery care, and child when newborn baby has any problem, it's a problem because you don't have the healthcare workers there, and then because many of these institutions are shut down, either due to somebody there having COVID positive result, or because they are not able to handle it. So they are blamed. The doctors are blamed that what kind of doctor this person is, that he cannot even open the clinic. And when they open the clinic, they say that, oh, we will get COVID because we are going to these facilities. So both ways, it's a double-edged sword actually. So chronic diseases, diabetes, hypertension and all that, they all need medicines, timely medicines and timely advice. What do you do? It is also affected, especially during lockdown situations. Dialysis, people want dialysis, and then they have to actually approach the hospital for that. So with great trepidation, they approach the hospitals for that treatment with the fear uppermost in their mind whether they will contract COVID. Same thing about oncology. They need to have medicines in a timely manner. So there are actually people have tried to reach some certain drugs to them, but when they have to have IV installation of the drug, then it is a problem unless they go to the facility. Mental health problems, as I told you earlier. So, but this is actually mentally ill people also. Denial of care to these people will be very, very difficult to handle by the family. And the regular immunizations, these are also going to become a problem, and it has been seen that in previous SARS time, denial of immunization actually led to increase in measles, etc. As a result of not getting the immunization in time. Interrupt supplies, uh, because of lockdown, we know all that about lack of transportation and things like that. So, what are the ethical issues in research? First of all, whichever system is going to do the research needs that research to be registered in the Clinical Trial Registry of India. That's a must. And the other requirement is that the ethics committee which reviews such proposals should be registered. Mostly these are academic research, so they have to be registered with the Department of Health Research. Those which are actually under the purview of the DCGI or CDSCO, they have to be registered with CDSCO. Otherwise, you can be penalized. So, the constraint of emergency is there, the time element, the choice of intervention, what research methodology will you adopt. There's very inadequate information for you to actually design a study, and over that you have inadequate resources, human, infrastructure, financial. So who will fund this research? Then awaiting the publication of results. This is also very, very difficult aspect, because Although now what we see is very quick publications, and also you get the pre-print publications, which was not the norm earlier. So these are the new norms which have come up. But what happens is in the pre-print publication of or the interim analysis part of it, sometimes may give you a wrong conclusion. So, and moreover, when you are doing this quick publication, the peer review process may get affected. It may not be properly reviewed. So, what happens is all sorts of unethical, research outcomes, research conduct of research resulting in outcomes get published. You really don't know what to believe, what not to believe. So, you actually go by the reputed institutions, but you know very well that these malpractices happen even in reputed institutions. So you really don't know whom to believe actually in such instances. So actually, honesty is the greatest value, honesty and transparency, which will do good for the mankind because those values can be taken up and one can think about it and design a study. So actually, it's very difficult to choose a design. What can be the outcome? What are you looking for? And one thing one must learn is you don't have several outcomes because it becomes very, very difficult when you are sending safety or efficacy data for analysis. You have 3, 4 outcomes lined out. What can you actually infer from that? So be very practical, just choose one or two most salient. But then you actually are in a dilemma. Are you going to look for how many can be saved, or are you going to look for how many deaths may occur? So these are grave questions, basic of the ultimate outcome that you are looking for. So your designing of the study depends on that. So the prerequisites for research, of course, in every research should be actually having social value, that is universal. But here we are actually emphasizing it all the more that it should have a social value, a scientific validity, and there should be a quick ethics review. Actually, 48 to 72 hours, even 24 hours. And some people have asked that we are going to submit this proposal by 10 o'clock, and by 2 o'clock, you have to give the decision. That is impossible because you have to go through the proposal, you have to see whether it is in order. Incomplete proposal, how can you actually pass it on? So it has to be a back and forth discussion between the researcher and the ethics committee to come to the decision, which takes a little time, but it can be done in a day or two. That has been done even otherwise. So there has to be institutional facility. You have to see to that. And then good participatory practice means actually it is involvement top down and from below up. That is, the sponsor, the institution, and the investigators, they all form one group which will be called top. And the down is actually the participants, the community, etc. come into play. And in the top position, of course, laboratories also come into that position. So it's a dialogue, to and fro dialogue, and the community is involved in designing the study. So that is called good participatory practice, and you can be assured that a good design is actually formed, a good informed consent document comes forth. This has been done in India also, so it's not something alien, but the term may be alien because it evolved later, good participatory practice. So, with regard to the traditional systems, it would be worthwhile to see the, I'm very sorry that and is actually for 7. So, in typing a mistake, 7.13 of ICMR Ethical Guidelines 2017, if you go through that, actually there are 5 points that have been highlighted. In 2006, it was more elaborated and 2000 and 2006, the research councils were consulted, and that portion was actually based on the mutual consultation. In 2006, it had more elements because by the time WHO had come out with their document in 2002, and this was actually included um, in that portion, which was more elaborate. But in 2017, this was taken off because Ministry of Ayush was already formed, and it was expected that the ministry would take care of all those things. So only salient elements have been added here, stating that all the relevant guidelines and regulations which are applicable to the traditional systems should be followed. And if you are going to involve the uh, uh, other systems as well, then you should include co-investigators from those systems, because they will be able to judge well the adverse reactions and the designing of the study, how it should be done, etc., etc. The ethics committee, if it lacks such a such an expertise, it can actually co-opt an expert from the relevant system for review. That is, I am talking about ethics committees in the modern system of institutions. But if it is a traditional system, then you have your experts there. But you can induct or co-opt an expert from the modern medicines system as well, which can actually prune the review process. And if folklore, ethnomedicine are actually used and it's worth to patent that, then the benefit sharing aspect also should be taken care of. There's something called prior informed consent. So they should be told that if this becomes patented, then there's a commercial end to it, and part of that will be returned to you. And also, the fifth point is about the quality of product, which is very, very important when you do research in using the medications by the traditional systems. What are the barriers? Main thing is the resource allocation. The funds actually dry up. The funding agency is mostly now busy with COVID management, etc. So like I hear that some agencies have stopped funding for the routine research, and then there are plenty of duplications. There have been so many applications coming in. Most of them may be duplications actually, and of course, you have to confront the desperation and fear of the participants. When it comes to ethics committee, what is the benefit risk ratio? The ethics, when it comes to ethics committee, it has to carefully see what is the benefit and risk involved in the proposal, and how you are actually obtaining informed consent. I find that uh, in many projects they have insisted on written informed consent, because that is the norm, that is the best way of obtaining informed consent. Fine, but look at the situation where you are not allowed to go in isolation ward or quarantine facility or ICU. You are not allowed in as a researcher. So how are you going to obtain informed consent? So that is what the ethics committee has to look into. And is there a trust built between the people and you as a researcher? You must have heard about the surveillance team going in northern India, going to a particular area, and then women actually throwing stones from the terrace, and it had actually affected the doctors there, and they were so angry. So we are doing it for public, as a service to the public, and this is the way we get treated. So, you have to actually, this is all because of the desperation and fear that they'll be taken away to isolation wards and things like that. And so many stories being told about that. Don't go there and things like that. So, out of fear, they have done that. So, one has to actually prime that population wherever they will enter in order to not meet such issues. The participants, of course, there is language barrier. I told you about migrant laborers. They were there in most of the states. They were there. So if somebody was to do research on them, then they really needed to have that same language being spoken for them to understand the real issues. And then access to intervention. How are they going to actually get it? And this is actually not only for research but also for practice. Some of the shops are closed, some medicines are not available. How are they going to get it? That is an issue, and things like that. So one needs to actually have flexibility. So in pandemic research, uh, flexibility is the one which is the new norm. So reporting timelines, you say that you have to report on 10th day. Now that is not possible because of the lockdown. So maybe the PI as well as the participant may actually delay by 2 or 3 days or even 1 week or 2 weeks. So you need to actually evolve mechanisms to do remote monitoring. So what that remote monitoring is, I'll come to that later. So you have to review supply mechanism, whether the medications are reaching them in time. Also ensure safety in lab collection procedures because that is the commonest method by which the frontline workers get affected by COVID. How do you collect the data? As I told you, remote monitoring is the new buzzword now. How do you do that? So you have electronic media now. So almost everyone has mobile also. So I'll talk about this later. And handling data. How do you handle that data? So many a times what happens is there is a, as I told you, it is the health workers who may have to do this because you are not allowed as a researcher into the facility. So they are already taking care of the patients. They're tired of that, especially in that equipment, personal protective equipment. So you are actually dumping this responsibility on them. Will they do it honestly? That is the greatest question to be asked. So there may be some who will do it honestly, but you have to depend on them and take the data as it comes. Sometimes there is a lot of missing data. Data doesn't come at all. What do you do then? Monitor and DSMB are actually DSMB is Data Safety Monitoring Board. So they are actually responsible for getting the data reviewed. So this is called source data review and source data validation. You have mechanisms actually, there are softwares available which can actually find out that a particular site is not behaving properly. There could be local reasons for that. So that is your signal to see what is happening in that particular site. So these are the aspects about when it comes to data in your hands. So when you consider research in Ayurveda, one should understand that one can always use modern science tools. Now these modern science tools, biomedicine or conventional medicine, whatever you call it, or orthodox medicine, modern medicine, all are synonyms. They have come to the world by only 2 centuries old it is, but they have developed scientific tools which they are using right, left, and center for doing research and publishing, etc., etc. This is not their property. It can be used by any system for that matter. So this can be used by the Ayurveda system as well. Use of modern science tools for extracting, enriching, and validating knowledge. ICMR actually had conducted number of trials for validating the knowledge that was in the classical texts for a particular indication. Nowadays, we talk a lot about interdisciplinary collaboration because one cannot work in isolation anymore. So it is worthwhile to actually have uh, collaboration with other systems joining together to enrich actually a particular science. You have actually mechanism of action at the cellular level. You have genomics. These are the science tools which have made it possible to do these studies. And also, it has for getting universal acceptance and building that confidence among the public for the satisfaction of end users. It will be nice if it is presented in a good manner, which is accepted all over. So always it is better to have controlled studies, but not a must, because the randomized control trials were supposed to be the golden rule, but no longer. And especially when you are applying the traditional systems, it is not necessary to do the control study, and sometimes it's difficult also to do the control study. But ways and means can be actually adopted to somehow have that control or a comparative arm. So, for example, ICMR had done the Shara Sutra study for anal fistula. So, on one hand, you have surgery, on the other hand, you have the medicated thread. How can you actually blind it? You can't blind it. But nevertheless, it serves as a control. So it was found that the Shara Sutra, people who used Shara Sutra actually recovered slowly, but the recurrence was only 4 in a year, whereas in surgical measures it was 11 times in a year. Moreover, the people were ambulant when they were actually using Shara Sutra, and which was very, very important because people had to go for work, etc. Whereas in surgery, you are lying on bed, so it is overall not so cost effective. So Shara Sutra was more cost effective. So like that, you have to actually plan your studies. So coming to pillars of protection. So welfare of human participants, generally we say, a general thing is what we say is informed consent document, informed consent process, and independent ethics review are the two pillars which take care of human welfare of the human participants. But in Ayurveda, there are 4 pillars: the physician, medicine, patient, and the attendant. It's very easy to apply to the public health need, and that is caregiver supplies. So caregiver is the physician that I described earlier. Supplies is the medicine that I said earlier. Patient, and instead of saying attendant, the facility. So let us examine this in more detail. When it comes to caregiver, the caregiver is responsible uh, for the research. They cannot, if they are very busy or something like that, they cannot have that excuse that I have so many things to see and all that. So don't take up research if you cannot be responsible for that type of research. Seek for the safety of the patient. See how the follow-up is, any protocol deviations. I was telling you earlier about follow-up on 10th day, which is not possible. It is on 12th day or even 1 week later or even more. So this would be called as protocol deviation. And we expect that in the pandemic times, there will be number of protocol deviations. Normally, if you have number of protocol deviations, it's a signal that there is something wrong with that site. So you go to monitor what is the reason why this is happening. So either it may be a careless PI, or it may be that the PI has delegated the duty to somebody, and that somebody has not done the job properly, not followed up properly, etc., etc. So this protocol deviation is now become the new normal. Only thing is you have to explain what was the deviation, and if adverse effects happen or adverse events happen, how do you actually analyze them, causality assessment, and how do you impart the care? This is all the responsibility of the caregiver. Any new recruitment during pandemic time is necessary, but what about the non-COVID research? We'll come to that later. So, field survey. It is very, very difficult sometimes during field survey uh, for people, for the caregiver to go. Many of, as I told you, many of these people are not even provided the proper PPE for them to protect themselves. And when they go to the field, they may not find the people that you are looking for. So, and then socio-behavioral research. Again, one has to have the supporting system like counseling, etc. If you're going to do research in that area, the supplies. Sometimes you may have to give extra medication. You are giving supply for a month means you may have to give for 2 months or 3 months in total. But the problem is at the end of 3 months, the patient may not come back to you. So that is a fallout actually. So that is also expected. Now these are all general issues that can happen, not only for Ayurveda, for any science, for that matter, any medical science research. So delivery arrangements. Sometimes you have to prescribe. Now this is going more in the area of modern medical system. Like for example, you are actually giving for diabetic patient, for example, suffering from COVID. So you will have to provide the anti-diabetic drugs, and in between we saw that the shops did not have enough oral anti-diabetic drugs. So such situations can happen, and then during lockdown times, what can you do? But I have heard of management which has actually somehow reached those sites by arranging for alternate mechanisms. I was told that in one site in West Bengal, where there was strict lockdown, the PI was told that you have to provide the drug, and the PI said that how can I do that? I'm not even able to get medicine for my child, and how are you telling me to go and give these medicines to these people? There's no transport available, etc. So the management somehow talked to so many people and all that, and got the permission for a vehicle to actually deliver these things to particular place. So the point is management arrangement is very, very important in such situations. Then sometimes if a patient is given 4 milligram of dosage, say 4 times in a month, and the supply is given to the person, and then the supply is not able to reach the patient because of lockdown and restrictions, etc. And honest uh, um, um, attempt to reach it to them has failed, then the only other alternative is to tell the person to reduce the dosage. Say if the person is taking 4 milligram, can be reduced to 2, provided by reducing the dosage the patient is not affected. But at least people think that there could be a compliance maintained, because if the person is going to use 4 milligram and it just gets finished at the end of 1 month, then the second month the patient doesn't have it. And if the patient has no other symptoms, then the patient will say, why am I taking this medicine? I'm fine even without the medicine. So let me continue like that. What happens one fine day, the person may go into ICU. This is especially true in cardiology research. Blood thinning drugs may have to be given, which is actually life sustaining for them. So if they don't take it, it's going to not work good for them. And the maintenance of requirements is very important, as I told you already, that managerial issues are most important here. Patient follow-up, the patient may be afraid to actually, as I told you earlier also, afraid to approach the facility, and the premises may be prohibited. There could be geographical restrictions. For example, patients come from all over. If we are taking Jipmar as an example, their patients come from Tamil Nadu, from Kerala, and all that. So, if at all uh, they have to come for follow up or something like that, the borders are sealed. So, how do they approach? So, those are another problems, other problems that you can encounter. So, they may have to wait till the borders, that restriction is taken away. So we had this scenario in Karnataka. We had it between Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry. So Goa also, I think they had that. So wherever the government feels that the borders have to be sealed, this is going to be a problem. So in that situation, can you give alternatives? You can advise alternatives. Then they have to actually, during follow-up, they may have to undergo some testing. Now that testing facility may not be there. Probably the testing facility is closed down. So what do you do? They don't have to travel all the way to get it tested. Is there a local facility available? They can get it tested there. That is only one of the solutions. Institution facility, of course, as I told you, management availability is very, very important. What are the safety provisions? Supply of PPE and all are inclusive in that. And the stay should be at reasonable cost. We have heard about private sector charging huge amount for the stay in the hospital. So the patient may become all right, but at the end of it gets a huge bill for which the patient may not be able to pay at all. So I already told you about testing facility, and of course, when you talk about testing for COVID, you need to get your blood tested in ICMR testified labs, and that is very, very important. I also hear of people saying that there are false positives reported, and this is especially in the private sector. In order to keep you in the hospital for some days and get the money for that, because everybody is actually tightened about the on the economic front. And also sometimes they say that in the government hospitals they say negative because they don't want to retain the patient. So both ways it is actually difficult. You really don't know what to actually believe. So of course adequate PPE supply has to be there provided. Now ICMA has actually brought out very quickly a guideline. I'll go through that. In 2006, as part of ethics review procedure, that chapter, a small section was devoted to what could be done in disaster situations. In 2017, uh, um, it actually took up a major section, section 12. And I think this was a good forerunner for whatever happened later. And we have now practical experience about undergoing this experience of infectious outbreak. So another guideline has come in, national guidelines for ethics committee in COVID research. So this is the booklet. You can see that in the website. So it has actually 5 sections mainly: statement of general principles, general ethical issues, ethical review procedures, informed consent, vulnerability. The salient ones have been highlighted, whereas most of the things that were there in the original guidelines have been retained. So when you talk about statement of general principles, this is retained as such. Um, the research should be essential. Don't go in for futile research. And of course, voluntariness has to be there, non exploitation. Social responsibility is something where you take care not to create stigma because of your research, and any ethnic rift and things like that. In present situation, we see that if a household has a COVID positive person, the corporation actually hangs a poster there, which actually is stigmatizing, because the neighbors are so angry that, oh, why this person is staying at home? That person can go to some isolation quarantine. Why bother us with the probability of contracting the disease? So this is something to be tackled by the policy makers, but it's actually a little problematic in pointing out that these people are suffering from this. And the funny point is that some of these people say that we did not get the help from the neighbors, but we got the help from the health workers. Uh, we could at least chat with them. The neighbors refused to even chat on the phone. So these are some situations very, very specific to COVID pandemic. Then, of course, you have privacy and confidentiality, risk minimization, professional competence. Those who are going to do the research should be professionally competent, actually. And this has actually taken root from the GCP guidelines, ICH GCP guidelines. So, maximization of benefit as much as possible is required. And institutional arrangements means the institution should be equipped enough to undertake such research. So, with that, I already told you the institutional responsibilities. All those are the prerogative of the institution. So, transparency and accountability, of course, is self-explanatory. Totality of responsibility. If some research there is a problem, then it is not the researcher alone who will be actually hauled up, but also the possibly the ethics committee, and of course the institution and the sponsor, if there is a sponsor in the background. All of them would be responsible. So therefore, you have to be very, very careful how you go about this research. You take all precaution, then actually in a court of law, you can be protected against allegations. So environmental protection is in another aspect. And I wonder how they are going to actually tackle the uh, PPE, which are plastics, how they are going to actually dispose them, God knows. So, general ethical issues, what has been outlined here, uh, some are retained and some have been added. For example, the 2017 talks about benefit risk assessment, privacy, confidence, distributive justice, payment for participation, compensation, conflict of interest, community engagement, post-research access and benefit sharing. These are there, but storage of biological material, which is a separate section in the ICMR guidelines, is given under general ethical issues, because naturally you will be actually, this is the prime time when you will use these samples for testing for various things to be applied in future, the mechanical action and things like that. What are the humors which are released, all these aspects, because Tomorrow you may have another scientific development which may bring out certain other elements which you are not able to find at the present knowledge that we have. Collaboration in research is very important, as I told you, and you see the sense of solidarity, principle of solidarity. You see that all over the world, people are talking about research in UK, research in US, vaccine trial here, vaccine trial there, and these are all actually the date and the information is shared uh, all over the all over the globe. So there is actually a collaborative spirit now. Even some of the pharma companies have come together to fight this menace together. And of course, public health and social behavioral research is very, very important. Two more that have been added apart from that is role of agency sponsors and governance of research. Biosafety in laboratories and hospitals is very, very important because testing of COVID-19 also requires certain what you call infrastructure. For example, it may require biosafety 2 level plus even 3 sometimes. So if you are going to actually work on the virus, then you require 3 plus biosafety level labs. So this is very, very important, and 4 if possible. So ethics review procedures, so it has its job delineated in 3 parts. One is for COVID research, what about the ongoing non-COVID research and new non-COVID research. I find that many people, wherever I am ethics committee member or otherwise, they say that can we take up non-COVID research now? My only question is it very necessary to do it during pandemic time? So sometimes the answer is that no, we can have the approval ready now. So when the situation eases, then we can go ahead with that. That's fine. But then you have to actually inform when they have enrolled the first patient. From that, you will know the honesty of the researcher that they waited. So that's very important. So COVID research. Now, most of these things that I'm going to talk to you are already known to you. So nothing great in that, except for the quick review. So scientific and ethics review are actually important, and that will be based on the national guidelines and regulations. Registration, as I had told you earlier, it should be with appropriate agency. Regulatory clinical trials under the purview of DCGI have to be registered with CDSCO, and the others are termed academic trial or biomedical and health research, which have to register with the Department of Health Research. Now, CTRA registration is also very important because this is the time when they can find that, and that will give a good idea to the nation that these types of research are happening, and it's an open access field. So even internationally, they can see what is happening in India. So categorization of proposals should be done by the member secretary as those proposals which may go under exempt category, or these proposals require expedited review, and these proposals require full committee review. So review on a case-to-case basis should be done depending on urgency, and the forum as described in the guidelines and regulations say. You can have tele or web conferences, and also what we are doing now is teleconference or web conferences. Zoom, whatever platform you want to use, you are meeting there, but it doesn't have the same, sting, or you can't say sting actually, the same flavor as it would be when you are facing each other. Physical presence, what I mean. What you can discuss during physical presence, you have some limitation when you have these web conferences. So, exceptionally preliminary research, uh, data or sample collection. Sometimes what happens is it's very, very important to collect the data or sample, because if you delay, they may either perish or they may deteriorate. So, in that instance, you submit your proposal to the ethics committee, inform them then that you are going to do this, and then see that the ethics committee approval is given. If they have some suggestions, you have to comply by that. So, available protocol review it can be expedited with interim or re-review, because this is an emergency situation. So you need not wait 1 year to get over. You can actually say that we'll see 1 month report or 2 month report and so on. So if members of local ethics committee are not available, then any other ethics committee in India could review till the local ethics committee is able to convene. So there has to be timely review and re-review if required. That's what I explained earlier also. If there are multiple ethics committees in an institution, they can which ethics committee would see the COVID research can be determined by the institution. So by mutual agreement services of another institution, also you can get your proposal reviewed. That is what I'm saying is user institution and host institution. User institution does not have ethics committee but wants to do the research. They cannot constitute ethics committee. Then they approach another institution which already has a well-established ethics committee, and that committee should actually agree to review the proposals from the user institution. In that case, they have to have MOU between them, and also allow the host institution to monitor them. It's not enough just to give approval, but one should also be able to monitor. The role of independent ethics is the same. Earlier, their wings were clipped, but now it has been opened. Only thing is, they have to be within 50 kilometers according to the new drugs and clinical trial rules. They have to be within 50 kilometers of the of the organization from where they are actually getting the proposals to review. Of course, you can have subcommittees for SAE or expedited review committee to go through the SAE. So ethics review, you can do it now. You have ICMR common forms. It's easier to actually submit in that. So you can submit in that, or if you feel that your form is much better or to the point, you can use that also. So for emergency research review, you should have, because you are supposed to have SOPs for your ethics committee. So you can add this SOP for emergency research review, the sample of which also has been given in the guidelines. You may, when you reach down much below after the references, you will find this SOP there. You can adopt it for use of your ethics committee. The secretariat actually screens the proposal for completeness and categorization. I told you many times, these proposals are sent in a haphazard manner without actually going through the details that are required in a proposal, so that the secretariat will see, and if it is incomplete, can return it immediately. And if it is complete, then it will actually categorize them into exemption, expedited, and full review. So this is accelerated procedure. As I told you, 24, 48 or 72 hours. I also have heard the Egyptian people saying that they actually take 1 week. 1 week may be actually too long. And they say they're very strict about it and things like that. So virtual or tele or video meeting is preferable with suitable virtual platforms, and the agenda should be short. It should not be like 26 proposals in a day. No, that is not possible. Even 26 proposals in a day in a routine review procedure, it takes a whole day and sometimes spill over to the next day if you are actually judiciously reviewing that and discussing with the PI. So you can imagine that when emergency is there, it will be even more difficult at first. So prior review by experts, what you can do is before submitting the proposal to the committee, you can actually ask other experts. You can pass your proposal to the other experts, ask for opinion, and then and clarify whatever they have actually suggested, incorporating that in the proposal. So that will lessen the duration of time for review by the ethics committee. You can also have special invitees, and it's just like inviting experts, external experts in routine ethics committee review. After they have opined, they leave the meeting. This is about physical presence. You can do the same thing when you have a web meeting, because you get that that sign that certain person has left. So from that you can get assured that the person has left and not deliberated in the discussion while making decision. So the other thing is review consenting process, consenting method. I told you already that in such a situation it's difficult to get written consent, and moreover I feel that if written consent is taken into account, then you are actually becoming that paper is becoming a medium for contamination. So to avoid that, you can do oral consenting. Only thing is the person should or this oral consent process should be documented, and that document can be actually scanned and sent to the researcher. Also, because sometimes the participant may be a literate participant but may not be wanting to sign. So at that time you may have to have oral consent. If the person is illiterate, naturally you need to have a partial witness. So oral consents, whether you are literate or illiterate, you may have to have somebody documenting that this was done. Actually, now I have come across a situation where a pharma company has asked ethics committee approval for the procedure that they are changing the some process in that. So they want to inform the patient about it. Since they cannot enter the premises, the patient can, many a times, the patient may either refuse for any change, or if they consent, they may not give written consent, or if they say that we will give only oral consent, the healthcare giver has to actually document that, put the seal, scan it and send. So there are different ways in which you can deal with that. So the communication to the participant, change of PI due to indisposition. Many a times the PI himself or herself may get affected. So you need to have a co-PI there who will actually take charge. Privacy and confidentiality, we talk about it, but you will see in subsequent slide what is the position when it comes to public health. So there should be protection from stigma and discrimination, but I wonder whether we are able to achieve that in the present circumstances. So decision, how you take the decision is either by consensus or by voting. And if there is any disagreement, it should be recorded. It's the same as we would do in normal circumstances. And the whole procedure, you can actually digitally record. Even otherwise, some institutions actually used to record all the discussion. That was for not only for helping them to write the minutes, but also for recording that such and such discussion had taken place. And some inspectors who had gone to some of these institutions did check that for its authenticity. So, but now actually in the web meetings, it's very easy to actually record it. So that becomes your digital record, and that also gives you the people who had attended for the secretariat to note it down. Multicentric research, there you can actually have one particular ethics committee go through the whole thing in fine detail, and this committee would be called as designated ethics committee. Designated ethics committee doesn't mean that it is superior to all the other ethics. Imagine a PGI Chandigarh and AIMS EC fighting with each other that we are superior to them. So the thing is, we were actually struggling hard to find what could be the ideal word to denote that, because if you say better trained or something like that, it would be actually an aspersion on the other ethics committees which may be doing much better. So it was finally decided that this ethics committee would be called design and designated ethics committee, and it will be actually finalizing the protocol only in consultation with the local ethics committees, local site ethics committees. And if any ethics committee has any problem, that should be solved. And if it is not possible, then that site gets dropped. So all the local registries, all the local ethics committees retain their jurisdiction. They can review it themselves also, and they can either do it by expedited method or by full committee review, and they can accept the decision of the designated ethics committee or do their own thing and communicate that this is what we have done. And if it is acceptable, the designated ethics committee has to incorporate that in the protocol. And that common protocol will go to all the sites, and the local ethics committees will actually monitor the conduct of the clinical trial at their site. But they have to be in the COVID research. It is important that they are registered. So I find that many of the ethics committees are not even aware of this. It's a law actually now. Clause 15 of the new drugs and clinical trials rule 2019 states that all biomedical and health research. Now, when you say biomedical and health research, it encompasses, it's an umbrella. It includes all the systems. So, they have to actually follow the ICMR guidelines. That means it's a law. And the ethics committee also, whatever functions are, everything as it is described in the national ethical guidelines. So, having known that if an ethics committee doesn't register and takes a decision, that will be treated as null and void. They may continue to do that, but trouble comes when there could be inspections. So that ethics committee can be suspended, and they will have to give an adequate reason for that. And if it is not satisfactory, it will be blacklisted. So I hope the people who are attending this, if they are coming from different ethics committees, please ask your ethics committees to register with the DHR. So common review is generally for low or minimal risk, but in this emergency situation, it can also see the high risk, and especially research on vulnerable population. Continuing review, once you give the approval, that is not enough. You have to continue reviewing that project till it is completed. That is, continue evaluate and monitor whether they are compliant to the guidelines or the regulations. Also, you have to see whether they are compliant to the protocol. But sometimes they may deviate from that, which will be called protocol deviations if it is a milder case, violations if they have gone totally different. For example, inclusion criteria says ABC, but they have actually included D, which was not there in the protocol. That is violation, and that shows bad intention on the part of the principal investigator. So the ethics committee, if it finds that, it can even halt the study, and it will report to the institution as well as the drug controller if it is a regulated clinical trial, and they can blacklist that site forever. So compensation for the research-related injury would be determined by EC ethics committee as it is given in the guidelines. It does not have the formula which is actually used for the regulated clinical trials. So what do you do in such cases? The institution has to have a mechanism. The institution should have either a group insurance, or it can build a corpus to take care of such injuries, because these injuries may not happen in all patients, but a rough estimate of what can happen, and that should be actually taken care of by the institution. Let's suppose the researcher is actually submitting a grant, then there could be a head for compensation and a reasonable amount placed there for the granting agency to look into it. What about ongoing non-COVID research? Now here, you may actually have to stop fresh recruitment because of the situation, or you may extend the duration of the study because in between you have not been able to recruit fresh people. And how do you inquire for progress? You can do phone calls, or if there are suppose say 3 visits to be done, you can reduce it to 1 or 2. Maybe you see if it is a monthly this thing for a period of 3 months, you may just go for the final visit. So and if there are investigations to be done, it could be done where the facilities is available rather than traveling all the way to your facility. If some sites are not yet initiated, you can postpone the same. For example, there may be 4 sites which have been approved. Now you want to actually think of 5th and 6th, but these sites have not yet been approved. So you can actually, it may have been approved, but they have not yet initiated the study. So you can ask that may be postponed further till there is relaxation of circumstances in the present pandemic circumstances. So sometimes you may require reconsenting. As I already gave you an example of a pharma company wanting reconsent because of the change in procedure. Such situations, wherever there's a new information, new procedure, a new change in the protocol, you have to get reconsent. What about new non-COVID research? Now, you have to see whether it is very important for studies to be carried out, or it may be reviewed and kept in abeyance till such time that this can be initiated. But information should come back to the EC that the first patient has been enrolled. See that if there is a negative impact or there is a positive impact on the participants, because negative impact means risk is increased. So then naturally you will have to make changes, inform the ethics committee about it. Ethics committee may advise stoppage, or they may say that you take a certain precaution to circumvent that situation. If there is a very positive impact, then you don't have to continue the study at all. So as I told you, any safeguards which may be required, and one of the safeguards is actually frequent reporting. Not wait for 1 year. Generally, we say that you have to give annual progress reports. That may be reduced to 1 monthly, 2 monthly, 6 monthly, depending upon the risk. So, informed consent. When we talk of informed consent, always remember that there could be a therapeutic misconception. That means the patient may or the participant may think that this is for treatment. So you have to make it very clear that this is research. So how do you communicate that? How the patient understands, that's very important. Suppose the patient does not have the ability to reason, then somebody else comes into the picture. We'll come to that later. Always remember that whatever process you do, you have to document that. And remember that a participant is not below your level, because that participant is actually giving you the knowledge based on which you are actually propagating that either in conferences or through papers, which bring glory to you and your team and your institution. But the participant gave it to you. So that's why you don't say subject. Don't prefer the word subject, because subject means doctor patient relationship where the patient is always subjugated to the doctor. So it's a partnership. So you say participant, and it should be voluntary. These are the elements of informed consent document listed in the ICMR guidelines. So you can actually use these heads for your template of informed consent document. Um, as I told you, for children and illiterate people, there has to be one person called the or people who don't understand. For example, you have mentally challenged people, mental illness. They may not grasp the intention. So, in that case, you need to have a legally authorized or acceptable representative. Authorized means your parents or legal custodian, because they are authorized by law. But acceptable is not authorized by law, but that is the only situation where you can encounter such people who are responsible for these participants come into play. So, for example, if it is, say, street children who are going to be, and they are orphans, there are no parents there, there are no legal guardians there. But who can be actually responsible? Either an NGO in the place who is taking care of these people, or maybe even a police official who is in charge of that area, because you might find certain police officials who are very eager to bring some relief to these people and will be actually proactive if you're going to do some positive research, supposed to be positive research on these people. So all the time, whenever you have illiterate, and I also told you about oral consent, you have to have impartial witness. Then research on samples, generally not consent is done. The common statement that I've seen is, I give my consent for any future research, my samples to be used, my samples or data to be used for any future research. But always the patient can have the option of opting out. So while withdrawing, the patient can say that don't use my samples and data anymore. Or the patient may say that so far whatever you had collected, destroy that. So sometimes the researcher may want that data. It may be very, very important for that research. So upfront in the informed consent document, we will say that in case of your withdrawal, we will be keeping the samples and the data related to your investigation and progress. We will not destroy it. So the patient knows that it will not be destroyed, and if the patient is willing for that, then only the patient will say yes to getting enrolled. So these are some of the issues that you have to actually do when you are actually collecting samples. Then electronic consent is another method by which you can do it. Most of the people now have mobiles and may have tablets or PCs if that is available. So they will actually or laptops. Sorry. So they will actually give your consent through that. So that can be actually I mean, whatever has been entered there cannot be annotated. Only the PI responsible can make any changes, provided the person who has sent gives reasons that he by chance made this statement to rectify that. So that is also a documentation. So documents actually count a lot. What is not done, what is not written is not done. So you might swear by your God that I did that, but nobody will believe. The monitor, auditor, the inspector will believe because there is no written document to show that that was done. So electronic consent is one where you can actually have automatic documentation. Certain situations you can give waiver of consent. Whenever a situation is very impractical to get information about, say, burden of disease, etc., you can give waiver of consent. But mind you, this should come from the ethics committee. You cannot decide on your own that waiver is preferable. You have to give your reasons. And especially if you are going to containment area or hotspots and all that, it's a situation where you cannot get consent on written form in written form. So waiver is expected to be given there in those circumstances. And I was surprised that somewhere people were saying that they were getting the written consent. There was absolutely no problem and all that. I really don't know unless we go to monitor such informed consent process. So oral consent, as I told you, can have that, but get it documented. Vulnerability is an additional risk here because of the stigmatization, risk to frontline workers, migrants, those who are incapable of giving voluntary consent, the concept of therapeutic misconception, and additional safeguards to be applied for risk mitigation. So, safety of health workers is also very important. PPE supplies. I'm actually repeating this again and again because this is not happening all over. Then, safety from disturbing instances and assault. Prioritize research and schedules to prevent overcrowding. That is also another important aspect. And provide insurance cover to the healthcare workers as well. It's not only the patients but also these people who are in the fray. Psychological needs, as I already told you, you need to provide it not only to the participant but also to the family and the healthcare workers. No stigmatization, good communication, and flexible working hours. It's very important to have flexible working hours. This is what I was saying that my subsequent slide will show privacy part. That is, when it comes to public health issues, you have to at the same time protect the health information. But you give it in small, a little information which may be necessary for the patient or another patient, or to public health authority and its collaborating foreign agency, or to the patient's family and others involved with patient's care, or to the healthcare providers to share if public health safety is threatened. In these circumstances, you can breach the privacy, but this will be called protected health information. That is, it should not disseminate. That is why I was telling that the present practice of the corporation to paste labels on the doors of these COVID positive people that this is a house having a COVID positive person. It's on one side, it is actually taking care that people be careful for dealing with them. You can get the disease. That is the good part of it. The bad part of it is that you are actually stigmatizing them. So, the technologies that can be used, the strategies for clinical assessments are something new which have come up because of the present situation. There are novel research methodologies. I don't know how many of you must have heard about platform trials. The recovery platform is the most famous now, which is being done in UK. The point is, you have one control, but this control will be matched against different arms using different therapies. For example, if you apply that to say Ayurveda, you can have one control arm, and at the same time, another arm can be on say Guruji, another one for Ashwagandha, another one for Ayush 64. So in one place, at the same time, you can include many people at the same time and get your results in the same time period. That is the actually the idea behind this, called platform trials, and this is now being successfully being used in UK, where they have different arms with say remdesivir, another one ritonavir, and even HCQ. So they have discontinued HCQ because now they know that it has not much of effect in the severe cases. So different populations you can use that. So at the same time, say if your target is say 3 months, in 3 months you get the results for different drugs matched against a single control. So that is the new one. You also have another like umbrella and I'm forgetting the name of another one. So, but that is actually meant for the studies at the molecular level. So telemedicine has become very common now, and you can also use alternate location, not the hospital, but ask the patient to come to another location which is acceptable to the person for follow-up visits. Reduce the site visits, remote monitoring. For EMR is actually electronic medical report, AE and SAE. But here, of course, the role of the healthcare worker is great, because they are the ones who will be allowing the reports to go out. Not allowing, they will be responsible. And also, if the people are actually electronic savvy, they can also and the form is electronic, they are able to fill it, then that's the best way to actually monitor. Provide alternative drugs wherever possible, and lots of missing data and inadequate sample size is happening these days, because if you have calculated statistically to have 365 patients, then you have been able to complete only 130. What do you do with that data? So that is missing data, and naturally your sample size also you are not able to complete because patients are not coming, enrollment is difficult because of lockdown situation, etc., etc. What do you do? But there are now one thing is, of course, I forgot to mention here, is there are softwares available which can actually find out which site is actually having problems. And here, for the missing data, inadequate sample size, all that, it's a statistician's field. And data. With that, we need to see that there has to be ethical guidance for COVID-19 research, which may become valuable for future research in outbreaks. And this actually is a practical experience globally. So far, Ebola was the trendsetter, but now I think COVID-19 has created the more experience at ground level for future guidance for all countries to follow. With that, I end my talk. Thank you very much for the patient hearing.
Thank you very much, madam, for the very comprehensive and detailed briefing of ethical aspects related to practice and research in Ayurveda.